Ms. Custer, you talked about Taiwan telling its story, and I want to just point out, in 1979, I actually lived in Taiwan, and Taiwan was under martial law at the time. And the United States put a lot of time and energy into our relationship with China, and to some degree, we pulled back, well, not to some degree, we pulled back our diplomatic relationships with Taiwan. And now you let that time pass between 1979 and now, and you have a full-force democracy, prospering, doing well, freedom for their people, and you have, of course, China has gone the opposite direction. And I think that is a fabulous story to tell, one we really should be shouting from the housetops here in Washington, D.C. Dr. Ellis, let me have you put on your former state policy planning staff hat. And did you see evidence of Chinese interference in local electoral processes or overt efforts to sway political leaders to sever their relationships with Taiwan?
Yeah. Yes, sir. So first of all, I think it's important to understand how it is multifaceted, and I probably should, and I'm going to speak in terms of having followed this for about 20 plus years as an academic, and certainly the unclassified portion of what I saw while I was at the State Department. But what you see again is this weaving of a tapestry of all levels. It's the economic blackmail selectively applied that we saw before. It's the whispering in the ears of business lobbies in agricultural and in other sectors. It is the bringing people over to the PRC in terms of journalists or others to try to get favorable coverage and access. It is sometimes the inappropriate things. I'll mention one specific case that I haven't mentioned yet, of course, which was the flip of Taiwan. Now, I've spoken with President Varela, and I know that he would deny that there was a quid pro quo, but it did not go unnoticed among people that right after he flipped to the PRC in 2017, that the family-run business that was in his brother's name suddenly got a really big contract from the PRC. Similarly, it was not unnoticed that his Vice Minister Nicole Wong, again, who I know, a wonderful person, very bright person, but after she played a critical role in that flip. Literally just months later, she got a very cushy job representing China Harbor Engineering Corporation. And so I think there is this sense of both the offers and does China play dirty, and including some of the more the indirect electoral things. And if I may, just one more thing, and Ms. Custer also alluded to this, but really to emphasize the promise of benefit is often an unrealized promise. I have done several studies which have been published looking at IMF data in which you actually see that if you look at the 2 to 3 years after recognition, when you include both what is lost from Taiwan and what is gained from the PRC, in almost every single case, it is either flat or it falls. In part, that's because some of the traditional products, such as coffee and fruit, there's no real reason for the PRC to bring them in refrigerated containers halfway around the world when they can get the same product from Vietnam or the Philippines. That's oftentimes a symbolic thing. At the same time, their export agencies oftentimes don't have the expertise that they need. And indeed, when you look at the actual investment projects, there's a certain amount of work that is done, paid for by those countries, but not in Panama, not in Costa Rica with the disastrous Route 32 project, not in the Dominican Republic where something like $600 million of electricity projects were promised that never happened, not even in El Salvador where there's talk about La Union. In almost every single case, those promises have been empty, but it's those hopes that often are sold, whereas I think that the benefits that Taiwan provides, often right-sized for our partners, are something that's much more tangible to their benefit.
Thank you. Ms. Custer, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, sure. Please, sir. So first, picking up on this, we call that buyer's remorse. You asked me earlier, Senator Kane, about how we see things differently in Latin America than in other parts of the world. One is the newness of a lot of these relationships. I field surveys of private, public, and civil society leaders in 141 low and middle income countries, including many in Latin America. And what you see are differences in how leaders think about what they've gotten in the relationship with China. And you see a lot more skepticism and doubt starting to flood in places like East Asia and Pacific, for example, where these countries have a longer history with a lot of these projects, where you're starting to see not only the promises, but the delays, the disruptions, the challenges environmentally, challenges with governance and corruption. And so this has soured things a little bit. Other studies have shown that China gets a public perception bump when it announces a new project, but it actually has a decline at the end of these projects. So those are the stories that actually aren't really being told yet in Latin America, but there's an opportunity there for learning. And then,
Before you leave that, can I ask this? Can you bifurcate the difference between that reaction from people on the ground and the leaders? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I talk about leaders, it's a fairly broad way of defining it. So mid to senior government officials, civil society leaders, private sector leaders. Typically, these leaders are thinking about a slightly different set of agenda items than citizens. Citizens are often historically undecided when it comes to China, but you do see a souring of public opinion, mostly in terms of reaction to news media, but also a souring when it comes to what's happening in particular communities that are affected by these projects. When it comes to leaders, what is a more compelling case is, where am I going to get financing for infrastructure projects? And I'm looking to China. And so there is a little bit of a difference there, but even in places like the East Asian Pacific region, you're seeing a souring on both counts.
Very good. So I'm going to still put my bookmark down, but yield to the senator from Florida.